Peter B. Collins News and Comment. It's Thursday, July 20th, 2017. Carl Howard is free at last. Loyal listener, staunch supporter, fastest click on Facebook from Columbus, Ohio. Carl Howard was sent to Facebook prison. He was banished from posting for 2 or 3 weeks. And the ban was lifted yesterday, and Carl is already contributing great content to the Peter B. Collins podcast. I really appreciate this guy, and I'm glad that he is liberated. Now, of course, we are running a little pool to see how long it will take for him to reoffend and be banned from Facebook again. So Donald Trump gave a bizarre interview to the failing New York Times. You know, he hates that newspaper, and he loves to denigrate them with that phrase. And it's a fascinating and bizarre exposure of the stream of consciousness, such as it is, of the bad comb-over in the Oval Office. Now, the lead story is that he dumped on Jeff Sessions, saying that he was very unfair to the president by taking the job and then recusing himself from the Trump-Russia investigation. And Trump, who doesn't seem to have a command of the sequence of events, said Sessions never should have recused himself. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else. Well, Jeff Sessions had to recuse himself because he fumbled, bungled, and lied in his confirmation testimony. And he couldn't have known before that happened that he would create the conditions that required his own recusal. And I'm sure even Jeff Sessions, with that pea brain of his from Alabama, is able to process that and figure it out. So this is what is so instructive and frightening all at the same time. Because when Trump is unfiltered and lets his guard down, and it appears in this interview, at times he was lighthearted and, telling little stories about how President Macron of France loves to hold his hand. He said that 3 different times. But he also showed a Jekyll and Hyde kind of persona, or personas. He threatened Robert Mueller, the special counsel who is investigating all aspects of the Trump-Russia scandal, and that if Mueller and his investigation expand to look at Trump's finances beyond any relationship to Russia, Trump would say, yes, that would cross a red line. Now, he wouldn't say what would happen when that red line might be crossed, but he said, I think that's a violation. Look, this is about Russia. Now, the special counsel really has free rein, and that's what pisses Trump off, is that Jeff Sessions set in motion this process where Rod Rosenstein picked Bob Mueller as the special counsel, and it really rankles Trump because Mueller had been interviewed as a candidate for FBI director in the Oval Office a day or 2 before Rosenstein picked him, without consulting Trump. So I can understand that he feels like, they're running circles around him, that he's getting special unfair treatment because he's an outsider who doesn't understand how these things work. And so then he dumped on Rosenstein, saying, well, he's from Baltimore. Now, in fact, he is not from Baltimore. He was the U.S. Attorney for Maryland, and one of his offices was in Baltimore. But the way Trump's mind works, he said, there are very few Republicans in Baltimore, if any. So? I guess that kind of political partisan loyalty is a defining aspect for a guy like Trump. So in criticizing Mueller, he said he was up here, he wanted the job. And after he was named special counsel, I said, what the hell is this all about? Talk about conflicts. But he was interviewing for the job. There were many other conflicts that I haven't said, but I will at some point. And I do understand to some extent that Trump feels that he's been boondoggled, or what's the right term here? Words fail me a little bit. But he feels as if they're boxing him in, that these decisions were made without him, and he is saddled with them. And he still has this bizarre lack of command of the timeline and of the way things actually work in Washington. About Sessions and his confirmation testimony, Jeff Sessions gave some bad answers, Trump said. He gave some answers that were simple questions and should have been simple answers, but they weren't. Huh? I mean, what the F does that mean? Now, one of the other things that surfaced is about Jim Comey and that meeting in early January at Trump Tower, where Comey showed up with John Brennan and the chief spook, Jimmy Clapper. And they had a grand old time, and at the end of it, Comey pulled Trump aside for a one-on-one and told him about the Christopher Steele dossier that was coming from this firm Fusion GPS in Washington that works for Democrats and Republicans. And Trump took it as a kind of J. Edgar Hoover extortion move. He said he believed Comey that told him about the dossier to make it clear that he had something to hold over the president. In my opinion, he shared it so that I would think he had it out there, Trump said. As leverage, said the reporter. Yeah, I think so, in retrospect. And when he brought it to me, I said, this is really made-up junk. I didn't think about any of it. I just thought about, man, this is such a phony deal. Now, he also claims that despite the careful contemporaneous notes kept by Jim Comey, that he doesn't remember escorting everyone else out of the Oval Office, including Sessions and Crown Prince Jared, so that he could go one-on-one with Comey, and Comey then said that Trump asked him to let go. Now, he didn't quite ask him. He suggested that it would be nice if he would let go of the Mike Flynn investigation. And now Trump's got amnesia. I don't remember even talking to him about any of this stuff. He said, I asked people to go, look, you look at his testimony. His testimony is loaded up with lies, okay? Now, I'm sorry, Donald, but your foggy memory, this perhaps recently developed amnesia about this meeting with Comey, that will not, pardon the expression, trump the contemporaneous notes kept by Comey. If it ever comes to who said what when and who was telling the truth, I don't think that Trump would win in that struggle. And to Rod Rosenstein, Trump complained that Rosenstein was in effect on both sides when it came to Comey. He's the guy who wrote the memo that Trump asked for to create the pretext for firing Comey. And then, of course, Trump undermined that by telling reporters the next day, oh, no, it was all about Russia. But Rosenstein recommended Comey to be fired and then appointed Mueller to investigate whether that dismissal was an obstruction of justice. And we know that Mueller and Comey are pals. And Trump says, well, that's a conflict of interest. Do you know how many conflicts of interest there are? And I have to admit that from his point of view, despite his bizarre stream of consciousness and all of his sensitivities and his insecurities, he has some valid points. Now, one other thing that he said about whether he needed the Russians to provide damaging information about Hillary Clinton, here's another statement that comes blurting out, and you got to say, well, man, you know, there's some merit to this. He, quote, there wasn't much I could say about Hillary Clinton that was worse than what I was already saying. Unless somebody said that she shot somebody in the back, there wasn't much I could do to add to my repertoire. I think that's fair. It's one of the reasons why, when I look at all this, there was plenty of ammunition, if you will, for Trump to use against Hillary. Without the DNC hack or leak or WikiLeaks or Russia involvement or Peter Smith, the longtime dirty dealing Republican political operative, this is all just so bizarre. Now, Trump did make some errors in his interview. He described savings from health care and tax cuts as a windfall for the middle class. A little fact-checking from the New York Times shows that, at best, the top 1% would get an average tax cut of about $270,000, while the middle fifth of Americans would get a break of about $1,900. So he continues to play fast and loose with the facts, and it indicates that he just doesn't care and that he never bothers to discipline himself to learn these things. And he's been so missing in action in the whole health care, Obamacare blow-up attempt. He just wants an outcome, and he doesn't have the discipline to really hunker down and study the nuts and bolts of all this. Now, I'm sorry to say that Jeff Sessions is not taking the hint. And apparently he did offer to resign about a month ago as his relationship with Trump started to spiral downward. But today, as he announced some new enforcement actions against alleged dark websites, he said that he and his colleagues intend to continue to serve, and he'll do so as long as that is appropriate. We are serving right now. The work we're doing today is the kind of work we intend to continue. I'm totally confident we can continue to run this office in an effective way. My apologies to true Southerners for that very poor impersonation. New York Times has an interesting analysis piece today about Mr. Wheeler Dealer. Because, Trump promoted himself as the art of the deal guy. The guy can really, get good deals, and he's a great closer. But when it comes to the recent debacle of the efforts to, quote, repeal and replace Obamacare, Trump has come up empty-handed. He had another one of those events on Wednesday where he called all the Republican senators to the White House, and he tried to single out Ron Johnson, Republican of Wisconsin. And as the article says, he attempted to use pleasantries, cajoling, and ultimately some Oval Office muscle. But Johnson could not be charmed, he could not be out-bargained, and he could not be scared into supporting the measure for the sake of a president whose inability to bend fellow Republicans toward his political will has become a liability for his young presidency. Yes, in so many respects, he is a leader with few, if any, followers. And he doesn't appear to know how to close a deal, even though it appears they were pretty close to getting the Senate votes they needed. But the article also analyzes that fear of losing a Senate seat, for example, is one of the most powerful weapons that can be wielded in Washington. The bottom line is that most Republicans are not afraid of Trump. Ron Johnson, for example, got more votes in Wisconsin than Trump did. And Dick Durbin, on the other side, the Democrat from Illinois, says Trump has limited experience in government and politics. He lacks a deep and experienced team. His poll numbers are disastrous. It's more or less impossible to sell a program when you have those conditions. And when you see the Republicans fighting each other in such a manner, I think it's great to just get out of the way and watch. Because Mitch McConnell appears to be determined, if he can get enough votes to get clear of the need for a debate measure, a debate resolution, he wants to force the Republicans to essentially walk the plank. He wants to force a vote on a simple repeal of Obamacare and see if the same senators who voted for it when it was a safe vote because Obama could be relied upon to veto it, he wants to see if they will vote similarly this year as they did in the past. And what will that do? It will make them more vulnerable to challenges and loss at their next election. So take it to the mat. Take it to the limit, bros. it can only hurt yourselves, and that's something that warms my little heart. The Donald went for a little pep talk to his so-called voter fraud commission as it held its first meeting yesterday in Washington. And Trump basically begged them to bring me something, give me something to prove that there actually was voter fraud, to the extent that he suggested that led the popular vote to be, it led Hillary to win the popular vote. That's what I'm trying to say. But this is a fool's errand. We know that there's very little voter fraud. And even Chris Kobach, the Koch brothers supported Secretary of State from Kansas, the guy who ran the interstate cross-check list that prevented millions of mostly Democrats from voting last year. Well, he said that in his own state of Kansas, he found 128 cases of non-citizens who registered or tried to register. Now, that's not full-blown voter fraud. That is a violation. It's an infraction. But to me, voter fraud is casting a ballot that you are not entitled to cast. And he has found 9 fraud convictions over the last 6 years in the state of Kansas. I don't know the details of those cases, but I'm sure many of them were people who were simply confused or who did it inadvertently. At any rate, this, of course, is a solution in search of a problem. The solution, of course, is more Republican-drafted voter suppression tactics. And last night on the public television news hour, one of the members of this commission who is not tainted, he is the Secretary of State of Maine, and I don't have his name in front of me, but he said, look, I don't expect this to be a whitewash. That's why I'm participating. But I also don't expect it to produce the evidence to support Trump's outlandish claim of 2 to 3 million cases of voter fraud last November in the presidential election alone. And I'll note that some of the longtime malingerers from the Bush era of election rigging, including Hans von Spakovsky, are members of this commission. So you can expect that they will report that the sky is falling and photo ID and more voter suppression will be the solution. Now, I know I'm pretty negative about this guy, Trump, and I actually do look for areas of agreement. And today I'm happy to report to you that for the first time in ages, I have found one. And I don't think this is actually his secret plan to end the war in Syria. But the New York Times reports President Trump has ended the clandestine American program to provide arms and supplies to Syrian rebel groups, according to American officials. This occurred about a month ago. It was not announced. That's why I said maybe it's the secret plan. But this is only sensible. And I was sharply critical of Barack Obama for maintaining this incoherent, irrational strategy such as it was in Syria, where we had these twin goals of taking out the Islamic State while removing Bashar al-Assad from power in Damascus. And I've long argued it's senseless to try to do both at the same time. And Trump appears to be recognizing that. Now, what human cost will there be? Will these so-called moderate rebels that we have been covertly supporting, will they be thrown under the bus, so to speak, left vulnerable and to fend for themselves? What will happen with the Kurds that we have used in a very cynical way to try to win back Raqqa? To take Raqqa from the Islamic State, and then what? Do we give it to the Syrian government? Do we stage a new American occupation on soil in the Middle East? Nobody has a clue. So, to the narrow extent that Trump has rejected this useless and counterproductive policy that he inherited, it's a good move. But what's next? we can just guess. That's what we are left with. As you know, Rexon Tillerson, who plays Secretary of State in this soap opera, he was the CEO of ExxonMobil before he was plucked from obscurity, at least politically, to become Secretary of State. Today, in a surprise move, the Trump Department of the Treasury announced a $2 million fine against ExxonMobil for violating sanctions that the U.S. imposed on Russia in 2014. And Exxon disputes this. They said that they, signed legal agreements related to oil and gas projects in Russia with the head of Rosneft, a guy named Igor Sechin. And the charge is that Exxon didn't voluntarily disclose those signings and that they violated the sanctions that were in place at that time. So I'm a little surprised. I would think that Rex could call Steve Mnuchin and say, hey, Steve, I'll forget about all those mortgages where you, foreclosed on people in California if you'll forget about our little problem with the Russians. But I guess some deals work and some don't in Trump's world. Today I'm releasing a new in-depth interview to subscribers of the Peter B. Collins podcast. And my guest is Carolyn Suffren. She's a medical doctor, an OBGYN, and a medical anthropologist. Her new book is called Jail Care: Finding the Safety Net for Women Behind Bars. And it's a fascinating look at the way we incarcerate females, particularly in county jails at the local level. And she provided health care for women incarcerated at the San Francisco City and County Jail for several years, and it's the basis of her book. And in this excerpt, Dr. Suffren explains the incredible and unjust way that females who are in custody, who are taken to a hospital to deliver a baby, are shackled to the bed.
I have yet to hear of a case of a pregnant woman who is in labor who was not who escaped because she wasn't shackled. I have never heard of a pregnant woman in labor escaping custody. And it is just an atrocious practice. It is beyond comprehension that our country still allows this to happen. It's a barbaric practice. It's inhumane. It has been denounced by the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and it's also a medical risk. And every major medical organization in this country denounces the practice and says it should not be done. However, there are only 22 states in this country that have laws that prohibit the shackling of pregnant women in labor. And even in those 22 states, it is still known to happen. There are still reports that it happens even after laws have been passed. And then there are the 28 states where there is no law prohibiting this. So it's really just shocking, and I think reflects a number of things, but the degrading and demoralizing way that we view prisoners and that we view pregnant prisoners, the fact that we could think this is even possible, and that this is the default. You have to have a law that says don't do this. And I think that also speaks to the fact that we forget that there could possibly be a pregnant woman behind bars, and so it's more of an afterthought. Now, just last week, Senators Booker, Senator Harris, Kamala Harris from California, Senator Warren, and Senator Durbin introduced the Dignity for Incarcerated Women Act, and that bill that they have proposed prohibits the shackling of pregnant women who are in federal prisons.
You can hear the full interview with Dr. Carolyn Suffren. It's available for subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, at iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spreaker, and most places where you find the Peter B. Collins podcast. And one of the other items that I discuss with Dr. Suffren is the way that the bail system in this country forces millions of people who are accused of a crime or an infraction but do not have the money to post bail to spend lengthy stretches in jail before they actually get to court. And in an op-ed today co-authored by California Senator Kamala Harris and Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, they open with this description: Khalif Browder, A 16-year-old New Yorker was arrested on charges of stealing a backpack in 2010. To ensure he would show up for trial, and because of a prior offense, the judge set bail at $3,000, but his family didn't have it. So Browder was sent to Rikers Island to await his day in court. He spent the next 3 years there before the charges were finally dismissed. And haunted by this experience, Browder hanged himself in 2015. So it's interesting to see a bipartisan bill from Senator Harris and Senator Paul, which addresses the bail system in this country. And the bill is called the Pretrial Integrity and Safety Act. And it requires states to shift from bail toward a personalized risk assessment, and that except in cases of serious crime, that essentially the preference will be to release people rather than to hold them for trial. The real issue is whether they are a flight risk, and most of the impoverished people who get held in jails for lengthy periods before trial are not a flight risk. They simply don't have the means to do it. Well, once again, America was watching a court proceeding with O.J. Simpson at the center. I was stuck in traffic this morning. I listened to part of the parole hearing in Nevada, and the commission did grant parole to Simpson, who is expected to be released in the fall sometime, completing about 9 years on a sentence for that strange case where he and some buddies went to a hotel room in Las Vegas. 2 of his friends had guns. They demanded the return of property that had belonged to Simpson, and that through failed friendships and others had fallen into the hands of the wrong people. And it was Simpson's shit, and he was trying to get it back. But clearly they crossed the line in threatening the people who were holding his possessions. And because of his notoriety, he wound up getting this it was a sentence of up to 33 years. Now, one of the most bizarre statements that I heard come out of Simpson's mouth at the hearing this morning was what a good guy he is. And he's been to a violence prevention workshop while he was incarcerated. But he said that he has never threatened anybody in his life with a weapon. And I'll just let you chew on that. John McCain has been diagnosed with a serious form of brain cancer, glioblastoma. It's the form that killed Ted Kennedy. And it has a very dire survival rate, 4% over a 5-year period. So this does appear to be the beginning of the end of the line for the senator from Arizona. And it is prompting very extreme commentary. A lot of gushing, commentary and commendations for his heroism during the Vietnam War. I've interviewed a man who served at that same prison, the Hanoi Hilton, even longer than John McCain, and he doesn't have a great deal of respect for the manner in which McCain conducted himself in the North Vietnamese prison. And on the other extreme, there are people like Caitlin Johnstone, who writes a column at Medium, and I appreciate her work. She's outspoken. She is very strong. She posted a series of links about McCain's diagnosis with the headline, "Good," period. And she went into a rant about the warmongering John McCain, which is absolutely accurate. My own limitations are that I've always been trained and inculcated about not saying nasty things about people when they're on a deathbed or on their way to it or have recently passed. And at least for now, I'll continue to observe that standard. We learned that the temporary ban on laptops for people flying into the United States from 10 or 12 countries has now been lifted as airport security theater continues to evolve. And we keep hearing from Jeff Sessions and others about the grave threat to our nation posed by people who want to come here and do us harm. But this one never made any sense. The idea that having a laptop in the cargo area, in the baggage area, is safe, but bringing it into the cockpit is not? That doesn't pass a basic common sense test. And we're now told that in airports, 280 airports around the world, including 10 that were targeted by the original ban, they have tightened up security, including using those little, I'm thinking of Stridex medicated pads, but these little wet wipes that they use to, wipe down your luggage to look for traces of explosives. And so now that that is in place, we're told that it's safe enough for everybody to keep their laptops in the cabin. There's a new whistleblower who has surfaced from the Department of the Interior. His name is Joel Clement, and Kevin Gosztola talks about his case in an article at Shadowproof today. I've linked to it in the show file for this podcast. Clement says, "I'm a scientist, a policy expert, a civil servant, and a worried citizen." And he didn't intentionally blow the whistle. He simply made some comments about climate change and its impact on a specific area in Alaska. And he said the administration was so uncomfortable with this work and my disclosures, I was reassigned to an unrelated job in the accounting office that collects royalty checks from fossil fuel companies. So he went through channels. And using the system that is set up for whistleblowers under the Whistleblower Protection and the Whistleblower Protection Enhancement Act, he has filed a complaint with the Office of Special Counsel, and that will be referred to the Merit Systems Protection Board, which reviews federal whistleblower complaints. However, there's nobody home. The 3-member board has a single member because the Trump administration has refused, or at least so far failed to appoint a chair, and the Republican-led Senate refused to confirm Obama's appointee to the board all the way back to 2015. So when you hear people criticize Ed Snowden or any other whistleblower and say, gosh, they have channels, they have protections, understand that that is a fig leaf. And Mr. Clement is now discovering that. And one of the reasons I know about this is because of whistleblower Joe Carson, who is a longtime listener and a loyal subscriber to the Peter B. Collins podcast. He's next on the list here of people to credit as podcast subscribers. But Joe Carson educated me about the Office of Special Counsel, about the Merit Service Protection Board. And if the laws were properly activated and utilized, we'd have some decent protection for whistleblowers. But as it stands, it's a cruel joke on those who stand up and tell the truth. In addition to Joe Carson, let me mention Tim McKay and his 2 monthly subscriptions that were booked on the same day, and Carl Howard, who I mentioned at the top of the podcast. He's a monthly subscriber, and he is finally back on Facebook. Hallelujah. My final story today relates to a story I covered yesterday. Glenn Greenwald exposed this new bill that's backed by 43 senators and 247 House members, which would impose serious criminal penalties, big money damages, and up to 20 years in prison on those of us who advocate boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel for its treatment of the Palestinians. Today, I'm happy to say that there is a Zionist group in the United States that opposes boycott, divestment, and sanctions, but nevertheless is standing up against this draconian incursion on my First Amendment rights. The organization is J Street, and I've talked to Jeremy Ben-Ami, who was the founder or one of them. They were started back in 2007 to promote a 2-state solution, and they are moderate compared to AIPAC, which wrote this bill. But they are Zionists. Moderate Zionist, is that an oxymoron? I'll let you decide. But the Israel Anti-Boycott Act is considered too extreme by the people at J Street. And yesterday, actually Tuesday, the VP for Government Affairs, Dylan Williams, issued this statement. As you know, J Street has serious concerns with the Israel Anti-Boycott Act as written, which would undermine decades of U.S. policy toward the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, bolster the settlement enterprise, and harm the prospects of a two-state solution. I've included our full analysis of the bill below. We recommend that members consult with free speech experts on possible constitutional concerns with the bill. Possible? Accordingly, I want to make sure that you saw the letters issued by the ACLU opposing both the Senate and House versions of the bill. J Street, I salute you for your principled stand as Americans, honoring our constitutional rights to criticize and to use our economic power against the State of Israel. Thank you. And thank you for listening all the way to the end of this podcast. It's available free every day on YouTube and at all my outlets.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.